Hi guys, it's Hannah Gelbart here and welcome to this episode of What in the World from the BBC World Service. Now you'd think that the more money you'd have, the easier it would be to travel, right? Well, that is not necessarily true. And even Africa's second richest man, a guy called Aliko Dangote from Nigeria, has complained that he's had to get 35 different visas just to travel around Africa. So why is it so hard? Well, there are some arrangements within parts of Africa where people can travel visa-free, but generally, looking through social media, all I can see are complaints about the cost and logistics of travel around Africa. So today, we are going to find out what it would take to create completely borderless travel in Africa. Here in the studio with me to talk this through is Daniel Dadzie, BBC journalist. Hey, Daniel.
Hi, Hannah.
Hey. So you are Ghanaian. Have you
Yes,
travelled around a lot around the continent?
A few times.
What's your experience been like?
It's easy in some bits and almost impossible in other parts. So within West Africa, which is where I've done the bulk of my travel, it's quite simple to move if you're speaking of moving by air. That is, you're not going to go through any land borders. You're just going to use your passport, go from airports to airports. It's quite simple because it works basically like you have a Schengen visa or, you have an EU visa and you have an EU passport and you're moving through Europe, right? It's quite straightforward. In some other places, it's difficult. I remember, this wasn't me personally, but last year I interviewed a group of people who drove from Accra to London. And they mentioned how they were able to use their national identification card for Ghana to drive from Ghana to Mauritania, which is the last West African country. But entering Mauritania was very difficult. They had to change border crossing points. Then they were told that they don't have the right documentation. It was very difficult. And from that point right up until they got through Europe into London, it was a different sort of arrangements to cross one border after the other. I found that it's quite simple if you travel by air, but in Africa it's very expensive to travel by air. So it's a yes and a no. It's really a mixed reaction.
Why is it generally so complicated?
I think that it's because as a continent, we've not yet made those agreements on a diplomatic level, on a geopolitical level, that would make it easy for people to move around in that way. So the continent is sectioned off, if I can use that expression. There's ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. There's the East African Community. There's SADC, which is a Southern African community. And within these blocks, it's relatively easy to move around. Like I was talking about my West African experience, for instance.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, but when you're trying to cross from one block to another, it really depends on that country and their rules. The truth is that there are a number of countries like Kenya who have opened their borders to all Africans to enter. But there is still a number of rules, even if it's like visa on arrival. In fact, AFDB did a study last year in 2023, and they found that for 46% of country-to-country travel within Africa, some sort of visa is required. That makes it more difficult for persons.
We're going to hear more about Kenya in a minute because it's such an interesting case study, isn't it? But now, let's hear from Zubaida Abdulrahman, who is a Ghanaian blogger.
I've been to 20 countries so far, and I would say out of that, only about 3 or 4 of them have been within Africa. Mostly because travel within Africa is very expensive, surprisingly. I could get a ticket to Germany for $600, whereas if I wanted to go to a tourist hotspot in Africa, like let's say South Africa, I'd have to spend about $1,100 on a ticket. Like the price gap is very big. There's always the option to go via road, but that doesn't seem very safe. And I see a lot of horror stories from people who have gotten to the border and there's been an issue or being robbed on the way. And it just seems like a bit of a risk. So I would rather just fly wherever I want to go. And unfortunately, within Africa, that's not really possible because it's very expensive, like I said. With regards to visa restrictions, I'd say it's definitely easier to travel within Africa because to leave Africa, the visa requirements are a bit stringent, and a lot more is required, and it's not as easy, it's not as straightforward with the application processes. But within Africa, we Ghanaians, for example, we're lucky that there are certain places we can go visa free. For example, South Africa recently lifted their restrictions, so for a number of days we can go visa free. We can go to Seychelles, we can go to Nigeria. There are a number of places we can visit. However, let me use Europe for example. If I got one Schengen visa to a European country, I could use that to explore all of Europe. And even that I could go via train, right? I don't even need to fly around. So I could take a train from one place and just keep going, keep sightseeing. It's a group package. Whereas in Africa, because I have a visa exemption for some places but not everywhere, and there's no one train system that takes people through countries, it makes even exploring the continent very hard.
So like she said, it's also a question of infrastructure.
Yes, it is. And, the mere fact that there are very few pan-continental carriers that can take you from country to country without transiting through another country. Like, for instance, if I'm traveling via the Ethiopian Airlines, I need to transit through Addis. If I'm traveling via Kenya Airways, I need to transit through Nairobi. It's convenient for the airlines to do that, but as a result of that, it's a bit more difficult for you to map travel via Kenya Airways between Ghana and, let's say, Morocco, or Ghana and, let's say, Egypt, because you're adding a lot more flight hours. So the infrastructure is a very important part. There's a certain bedrock of maybe rail travel, like Zubeida mentioned, and road travel that is needed, to facilitate this kind of travel.
So the African Union wants to solve some of these problems that you've experienced, and they want to remove restrictions and enable freedom of movement. They actually signed a protocol in 2018 to do this, but it hasn't been ratified, so it hasn't been made official by many countries. Why has it not been ratified? What's the hold-up?
So in terms of the African Union, there are lots of plans that always seem to be percolating. At the moment, we do have a majority of about 33 countries that have signed up for it, and a further 4 countries have deposited ratifications. What that means is that they're saying, look, if this is passed, I will agree to it. You get it. So we do have a majority of countries that have signed up for it. But remember that the continent is quite a complex continent. There's a lot of geopolitics to consider. There's a lot of local dynamics to consider. Currently, Algeria and Morocco border each other, but Algeria and Morocco don't allow direct flights between each other.
That's nuts.
Yes.
Right.
Because of the Western Sahara, because of an age-old Western Sahara political deadlock between the two countries. It's actually even almost jeopardized a football tournament there at the beginning of last year. So it's moving, is what the diplomats tell us, but there are some very real challenges that this has to be built on, that has to be solved before, this is built on top of it. The African Union has set an agenda for 2063.
Seems like a long way off.
I know. I mean, if I wanted to have a holiday in the sun, I won't wait till 2063.
You'll be around for a while.
Exactly. But apparently, it's not only going to facilitate free movement, it's also going to facilitate rights to work and residency across the continent. So hopefully that works.
You've kind of mentioned already, the European Union has the Schengen area. There's Mercosur in South America that lets some South American countries have free travel, ASEAN in Asia. And now the UN actually wants to come and get involved in this to try and implement borderless travel in Africa.
On this particular subject, I had the pleasure of speaking to Natalia Bayona. She is the Executive Director for UN Tourism. Here's what she had to say.
When it comes to visa facilitation, UN Tourism has some guidelines to help the countries to open the way. This is not only a job that we have to do in tourism. This is connected with foreign affairs and diplomacy, and this is connected as well with Ministry of Defense. If they together are aligned, normally speaking, visa openness come. So of course, the visa goes away, but this is a hard job. I see it as a midterm, long-term strategy, is at least 7 years to 10 years from now. Why? Because it's not only about Africa, it's about the geopolitics. In time of war, everyone wants to get closer and everyone wants to close the borders. But maybe 7 to 10 years is my vision.
How in the European Union, if you have the right passport, which we no longer do in the UK, you can live and work in any of the countries that belong to the European Union. Are there plans for that kind of live and work visa-less existence in Africa?
That's actually the idea behind the Agenda 2063. It's not just about tourist visas for that agenda, for the AU's own agenda. So stick around till 2063. Let's see what happens.
I'm going to be a grandma by then. What are some of the benefits that visa-free travel would bring to Africans?
The first thing is money. The first thing is money. For every dollar that you invest in tourism, for instance, you get about $10 back from the last time that I checked. If you look at the EU zone, of course, last year there was a big surge. This year there was a big surge as a result of the Paris Olympics. But even on a normal level, Africa gets only about 2.5% of the global tourism revenue. If you're counting international tourism receipts. A lot of that is because people within Europe are able to travel to Europe. People within America are able to travel to the Americas, okay? And so if you boost domestic tourism, you're getting a lot of money back. It also facilitates business because it's not just travel within countries. It's not just about going to visit. There's medical tourism where people go and visit hospitals, pay a lot of money for that. There is also business tourism where people go, they set up farms in other parts of the world. They set up businesses in other parts of their countries. Last week, a week or two ago, I interviewed a young fintech CEO who has raised $100 million, and he was speaking very, very boldly about moving to countries like Kenya, moving to the rest of the continent. Someone like that is going to need to be able to go to Kenya freely. He's in Nigeria. He's going to be able to, and one of the reasons why he picks Kenya, first of all, is how easy Kenya makes it for him, you understand? And the kind of course, if you're counting the socioeconomic environments that they have as well. So yes, it's a huge advantage, and there are examples elsewhere for you to see.
And it's not just Kenya, as you say. There are a couple of other countries in Africa that have scrap visas. So there's Gambia, Benin, Rwanda, and Seychelles. But Kenya is a really interesting case because it scrapped all visas for African nationals at the end of last year. So now let's find out how that is working from our BBC reporter in Nairobi, Jewel Kiriungi.
In January, the government of Kenya announced that tourists would no longer need a visa in order to enter the country. Now, the move was an attempt to promote Kenya as a tourist destination, especially by attracting business travelers. According to the country's tourism board, it says that it hoped to get some 5.5 million visitors every year in the next 4 years. Previously, visas would cost an upward of about $50. However, with the new policy, almost everyone, including some countries whose citizens previously enjoyed free entry, must pay about $30 for an electronic travel authorization, which is also known as an ETA. So the visitors who apply for the ETA must do so online at least 3 days before they travel and pay the $30 as a processing fee. Now, part of the new requirements also state that younger children who are less than 16 years also have to pay for the ETA, and they didn't have to do this previously. Only travelers from the East African community are exempted from this fee. Now, President Ruto has been calling for a borderless Africa. He has urged countries to ditch visas and encourage the free movement of people and goods across the continent. But critics say that the new policy does the opposite.
Daniel, you've mentioned money, you've mentioned tourism, but it's not just tourism, of course. A lot of people are going to want to move abroad because of work opportunities in search of better jobs or better paid jobs. What are some of the arguments that people give against free travel in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, you go to stronger economies across the continent, and there always is the case that, this anti-migration or anti-immigration wave that we've seen in the West is also present in some countries on the continent. People make the case that, others will come and take our jobs. People make the case that there's a burden on, the local systems. You go to, there's a strong sentiment recorded in countries like South Africa, for instance. But I think the beginning of this conversation, or the premise of this conversation, really doesn't go all the way to giving everyone rights to work everywhere. Because at the heart of it, those are also economic decisions that the home countries are going to have to make. The big agenda or the big target for 2063 includes right to live and right to work. But for most of the countries where you don't require visas to travel to in Africa now, it's just for a limited period of about 90 days to about 6 months. You can enter the country, you can visit the country, but if we were counting as in the number of countries that will allow you to live there and the number of countries that will allow you to work there, that 46% figure will be even lower.
I want to ask a personal question. Is there anything that you would have done differently in your life, growing up in Ghana, if you had had completely visa-less travel?
I mean, I guess the question is for my parents, because I spent a lot of that time alone with my parents. But yeah, I mean, if I had visa-less travel across the continent, I'm pretty sure that I would have spent a lot more time, particularly in my late teens and 20s. I would have spent a lot more time looking at other parts of the continent that I'd always heard about. I was always curious about North Africa. I was always curious about East and Southern Africa. But thankfully, I'd already done a bit of travel to Nigeria, La Côte d'Ivoire, a few countries in West Africa by the time I was hitting my 30s. So yeah, not too much to regret.
Great. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Hannah. I love the new look, by the way.
Hey,
it's
great.
a very glitzy studio.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. I'm Hannah Gelbart. This has been What in the World from the BBC World Service. If there is a story that you think we should be covering, something you want to tell us about, you can get in touch. You can send us a voice note on WhatsApp. We're on Instagram. Leave us a comment below, and we'll be back with another episode soon. Bye.